Hello, welcome. My name is Olivia Mattis. I'm president of the Susan Mendes Foundation. I'm so delighted you've joined us here today. Today, it's a bit of a departure for us. Normally, we focus on stories of World War II, stories, of course, of rescue, resistance, and hope. Today, we're also telling a story of rescue, resistance, and hope, but it's a story from our time. And it's quite a remarkable one, a remarkable film, a remarkable action, a remarkable hero. Our speakers will be introduced by today's moderator. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's moderator. Her name is Cookie Fisher. She's coming to us from Lisbon, Portugal, and we have speakers all over the world today. We have speakers in the United States, in Portugal, and in Australia. So we're combining all time zones, which is something that is, I guess, a silver lining of our meeting on Zoom, is that suddenly geography is no longer a barrier. We can be wherever we are and still come together. So Cookie, please take the floor.
Thank you, Olivia. Today, we are seeing Portugal as the only country to offer Dr. Sarmast and his group refuge. The Portuguese government welcomed Dr. Sarmast and the members of his school in the same tradition of Aristides de Sousa Mendes, the man we honor. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Sarmast. Dr. Sarmast is the founder and director of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, also known as ANIM. He fled his country in 1970s when music was forbidden under Taliban rule. Following the nation's liberation from Taliban rule in 2001, Dr. Sarmast returned to Kabul to establish ANIM, providing music education to students regardless of gender, ethnicity, or social backgrounds. When the Taliban retook power in August of 2021, Dr. Sarmast worked with an international coalition to rescue the 273 members of the school and re-establish it in Lisbon, Portugal. It is also my pleasure to introduce Beth Mendelson. Beth is the Senior Executive Producer of Special Programming and Documentaries at Voice of America. Previously, she was the Chief of the Afghanistan Service for 6 years, overseeing television, radio, and web programming, supervising a staff of 100 people between Washington, D.C. and Afghanistan. Beth's communication career spans 30 years across the U.S. government. Her work producing documentaries and television specials has taken her to Russia, China, France, England, and numerous other countries. And now I would like to turn it over to our first speaker, Beth Mendelson. Beth, you have the floor.
Thank you, Cookie. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And just to let you know that it is such an honor and privilege to have a discussion in the name of Aristide Sousa Mendes. People of courage know what it's like to stare evil in the face, whether it's the Nazis or the Taliban. And I'll go to our first slide where we can talk about Dr. Sarmast. Ahmad Sarmast knows the Taliban. He almost lost his life during a bomb attack in Kabul on December 11th, 2014. He was immediately rushed to the hospital in Kabul. After the attack, Sarmast lost consciousness and hearing in both his ears and was completely deaf, but that didn't stop him from communicating with the media when he was still in Kabul. He then returned to Australia, where the surgeon removed 11 pieces of shrapnel from his head, restoring partial hearing. So he left Afghanistan, he went to Melbourne, and he was never too far from his beloved Kabul. The Taliban had issued a statement about Dr. Sarmast saying that he was corrupting the youth of Afghanistan, but he was committed to keeping music at their lives at all costs. Again, the Taliban struck at Dr. Sarmast on August 15th, 2022. Sarmast Sarmast and his beloved Afghanistan National Institute of Music became a casualty of war. The Haqqani network destroyed the entire school. They ransacked the musical instruments, rababs, tambours, violins, and cellos were all decimated. This act is similar to what the Nazis did on Kristallnacht, which is what they tried to desecrate synagogues and Jewish shops and homes. It was an attempt to eradicate culture. And in Sarmast's case, the culture of music is what the Taliban were looking to eradicate. But I asked myself when I was hearing about this, what was the moral courage that Ahmad Sarmast had to fight back the Taliban? And it was a question that was in my mind as I was doing my research. And I said, this is a story I really want to tell. And that's when I came in. I reached out. I reached out to Dr. Sarmast's publicist, Jessica Lustig, and who is also a board member of ANIM. And I asked if we could do a story on him and what it would take to do this program. I had known about Dr. Sarmast because, as you said in my introduction, I was the chief of the Afghan service and had spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. And Dr. Sarmast is very well known in the country. But I wanted a story that was going to resonate globally, that to tell a story about a man and an organization that was making a difference during this really difficult time. Everyone had seen the escape, had known what was going on in Afghanistan, but I wanted a story that could transcend, what was happening on the ground there and tell a story that had some hope and resilience to it. So I quickly spoke with Dr. Sarmast while we were in touch and laying out what I wanted to do. He was in the middle of 5 airlifts, and there was only really one airlift left. And it was of FARIDA and Zora Ahmadi and their uncle Juma. And we had very little time to make it come together. But I got a cameraman in Kabul. I was familiar with Kabul. I knew visually what would make for an interesting backdrop. I wanted to have the mountains there and something that was symbolic, but there were very few camera people to get it at the time. I found an Australian cameraman named Jordan Byron, who was very, very gifted and talented. And I had a lot of trust in him because we had to find a safe house where we could do the interviews with the girls. I knew that they were going to be leaving quickly. And to do the story, we had to find a location where we were able to film them and in a very short period of time. I wanted to show FARIDA playing her violin. I thought that would be symbolic as we talk about the story. It was one of those nights where I didn't sleep very well, wondering if I should do that. Should I take the risk to get the violin for her? We had 3 different cars and drivers going to various locations until they came to the safe house. I wanted to be certain that there was no risk involved with the girls before they left, but we were able to do that. And we filmed them in the house. We used them. We did an interview with them. We showed them playing the violin and the interaction of the cousins together. The other thing we needed to do was to show their departure. They were leaving from their grandmother's house, which was a very important thing. They were leaving their family. While they were traveling with their Uncle Juma, they were still leaving their parents and their grandmother behind. And I worked with Juma that he would actually use his iPhone to film the scene with the grandmother. And it turns out to be really one of the beautiful moving scenes where the grandmother takes her hands and blesses the girls before they leave. And it's a beautiful moment. And Juma's there talking to her and shows that scene. Then we took them in the car going to the airport, and Juma shows the girls as they're in the car and they're making their way to the airport in Kabul. And then we get them on the plane, and they're on the plane really making a flight to freedom. And Jim is there showing them, and you have a shot of the 3 of them, but it's really pure cinema verite. In the documentary world, this is really, to get that kind of footage was very, very exciting for us. So we see them getting there. While that's going on, I'm on the phone with Dr. Sarmast. We have a crew in Doha they're waiting to see when the flight's going to leave. This is all happening in real time. So Dr. Sarmast is being followed. We see him going to the airport. We know that the plane's coming in. I'm in touch with the people on the ground. The camera people are aware of what's going on. When the plane lands in Doha, and for those of you who have seen the film, when the girls run out and FARIDA is sobbing in the arms of Dr. Sarmast, and I don't think Dr. Sarmast had a dry eye either. It was such a beautiful moment because you saw the tension, you saw the journey, you saw the hope, and you saw the resiliency of these children. They were musicians, they were young girls, but they were so courageous to leave their country to do that. And I think that moment comes across, and I think it's a very pivotal part of the film. And I really think it speaks to the heart of the message we were trying to get. So once the girls were in Lisbon and Uncle Juma, they were living in a military hospital, and they were essentially refugees. They had a whole new life. They didn't speak Portuguese. They left their families behind, and they were embarking on a new life, and which was, I think, a large challenge for Dr. Sarmast and his entire team of once they got there, getting them acclimated into a new kind of life. The first time I saw FARIDA and Zora, when I came to film them, they were taking a Portuguese lesson, and they knew who I was. We had Zoomed and they had seen me, and they looked up to me and they gave me a look, and there was this connection where they saw me and I saw them. And it was a moment that I'll really never forget, because it was something that they had a sense, I think, of who I was in the same way I had a sense of who they were. So that became my journey of being with them. We, the cameraman and I, wanted to shoot something really beautiful. I wanted to show them on the beach, something that was symbolic of freedom and something that they didn't have in Afghanistan. So we took them to Gaucho Beach, and there's a scene here where the girls are on the beach for the very first time, and I'm listening to them, getting ready to play some music. And then the next slide, I'm asking FARIDA and Zora to play their instruments for me, and we did some filming so we could get the sounds of them on the beach for the first time. After that, I wanted to document their progress, so I interviewed them I think it was 7 times during the course of making the film. This is in Lisbon, not far from the compound where they were living, and I'm asking them about their experience, about coming in, what it was like to finally be there. And we had interpreters there. They were speaking only their native language, and they were learning to speak Portuguese, so we had interpreters for the conversation. And you can see that the cameraman's miking me up to talk to them. Also on this trip, Dr. Sarmast and I were able to go to a beautiful palace to do his interview, but this was João Gomes Cravino, who was at the time the Minister of Defense, who is now the Foreign Minister. His commitment to the refugees, his embrace of the Afghan students was so demonstrated in the film. And I think it's important to note that Portugal has always been a nation welcoming of refugees. And I think that the Foreign Minister did a wonderful job of expressing his concern and came to the compound to meet them when we were there, which is part of the film. But, as a filmmaker, I have to say, you always learn lessons from the films you make. And to ask me which was my favorite film is to say, who's your favorite child? I loved all of them, and I have had a very special feeling for Afghanistan. I spent 6 years covering Afghanistan. And when the Taliban took over in the summer, I was really heartsick about what happened. I knew about the future for these girls and for young women, and I knew it wasn't going to be an easy road ahead for them. And I thought that telling this story was, in a way, it was a contribution I wanted to make about what life was going to be for those who stayed and those who were moving forward. And I wanted this to be a film about hope, really, for those that were left behind. And I have to say that without Dr. Sarmast and his passion and commitment to education, fighting social injustice, and saving Afghans' musical heritage, the 273 students would never have had a chance. Maybe FARIDA and Zora will be the next Yo-Yo Ma. You know, we never know. We never know if that's going to be the case, but they're going to have a chance. And they got to meet Yo-Yo Ma, and they got to really get to see what it's like to be a musician of renown. And I feel pretty confident that those two young women are going to make a contribution, but only time will tell. But I want to say that when I first met Dr. Sarmast, I instantly started to call him the Schindler of Afghanistan. And I think that I really had it right. He really has that kind of passion and that kind of commitment to making a difference. Dr. Sarmast, it's been an honor to get to know you and to work with you in making the documentary. And with each time I learn about something new that's going on in Portugal, my admiration grows for you only more, and for the people who you surround yourself with and the hard work that they're doing. And I'm so pleased that I was able to get to work with you to make this documentary, and I hope it will make a huge difference in the lives of your students in Afghanistan and in Portugal. And now, Dr. Sarmast.
Thank you very much, Beth, for this wonderful introduction and a very nice word about my work in Afghanistan and then in Portugal and here. Thank you very, very much for everyone attending this wonderful session today. And it's really a pleasure and honor for me to tell or to give you an update on what's happening today and what's happened with Afghanistan National Institute of Music after our departure. But again, why Afghan students had to be evacuated from Afghanistan? They're kids. They have the full rights to study music, to do what they love to do. There was a lot of speculation before the return of the Taliban to power, that the Taliban of 21 are different Taliban than the Taliban of 1996. There was a lot of whitewashing within the Western political cycles about the Taliban. The Taliban will be behaving in Afghanistan differently than how they behaved in 1996. But for me, living in Afghanistan and witnessing and hearing what the Taliban were doing while they were bringing a small town under their control, how they were treating musicians, artists, women, even before returning to power. And that was very, very clear for me that the days, if the Taliban going to come into power and they're going to take control of Afghanistan, once again, the people of Afghanistan will be silent. The women of Afghanistan will be deprived of their rights. An ethnic cleansing will be taking place in the same way an ethnic cleansing that was organized back in 1940s in Europe. So that's why when the Taliban reached the gate of Kabul, I began panicking and I began very worried about my community, about students. And I called a meeting of the Friends of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, a non-for-profit organization based in the United States, to see how we can help the students, how we can save the school. There were people still talking that the Taliban are changed, but I never trusted the Taliban will be changed or the Taliban are capable of being changed. Taliban have been created for destroying Afghanistan, for taking the happiness of the Afghan people. And with this belief, I began to evacuating my students, and I knew that the days of music education and music is in Afghanistan is over. And right now that I'm standing here in front of you and talking to you, Afghanistan is a silent nation. The people of Afghanistan are deprived from their musical rights. They don't have the right to study music and musical languages. They cannot listen to music. They cannot practice music. Thousands of musicians have been forced to go and beg in order to survive. And that's why if ANIM students or the students of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music were back in Afghanistan, they would definitely could not continue their music education. They were not able to make music. They were not able to enjoy from the beauty of music, playing music and learning music. And today, when I'm speaking to you, and the community of our musicians are safe, but thousands of musicians are still at risk in Afghanistan. And it's important that we, with the support of international community, do everything that we can do to support these musicians, to get them into safety. Today, when I'm speaking to you here, it's not just the women of Afghanistan, it's not just the musician of Afghanistan. Similar to 1990s, once again, the Taliban entirely excluded the Afghan women from social, political, and cultural life. The women of Afghanistan are not allowed to go to school, to go to universities, to work, and to make a living, to support themselves and to support their families. Today, when I'm sitting here and speaking to you, many families are sleeping hungry. Women were forced to commit suicide because they were not able to live. Can you imagine a widow in Afghanistan who was the breadwinner of for her family, but just recently the Taliban took that piece of bread from her also, but forcing her not to work, but banning women of Afghanistan from working. Of course, in such a circumstances, we could not help who we could help. And today, when I'm saying I'm outside of Afghanistan and I'm away from the outreach of the Taliban, and my young musicians are able to make music once again, but we all have the responsibility to be the voice of the Afghan people. And that's why when I'm sitting here today, I'm not here just to speak what I've done or what I'm doing. I'm here also to be the voice of Afghan musicians, but also the voice of Afghan people, to let the world know what's happening today in Afghanistan, and to call on the international community to make sure that Taliban are not supported under a new speculation that let's get engaged with the Taliban. The only way forward is to get engaged with the Taliban in order to change the Taliban, in order to ensure that the Taliban are changing their policies towards arts, culture, and music. While the international community is trying to get engaged with the Taliban, just 2 weeks, Taliban destroyed tens of artifacts, tens of monuments and statues in Afghanistan. In a time the international community is engaging with the Taliban, and in some countries they're giving red carpets for the Taliban, Taliban managed to arrest tens of women activists and put them in prison. Today, when the international community is ignoring the ethnic cleansing in Afghanistan, Taliban keep going. So there's no reason that the international community said that we're engaging with the Taliban to address the humanitarian issues in Afghanistan. Nowadays, $40 million of cash is delivered to Afghanistan. 40 million. And it's under the same pretext that let's get engaged with the Taliban for humanitarian purposes. But this money is used to cement the tyranny and the oppression of the Taliban in Afghanistan. So, providing with this background information or update about the current status of music and musicians and human rights in Afghanistan, I would love also to briefly inform you about what's happened with the Afghanistan National Institute of Music in Portugal, what we're doing currently in Portugal. I'm seeing in the question that is coming that people are interested to know where are FARIDA and Zora today. So after many months of living in a temporary accommodation in Lisbon, eventually a solution has been found by the government of Portugal and was proposed to us, a solution that was enabling our community to stay together, to make music together, and at the same time, ensuring that Afghan kids are able to continue their music education. Eventually, our group has been removed from Lisbon and moved to Braga, where the group is today all together. Everyone is enrolled in Braga Conservatory, All ANIM ensemble and orchestras has been reconstituted, reformed. And since our arrival, while we've been making some music in Lisbon, but now we're slowly taking our international presence once again. But at the same time, our students are doing extremely well in their schooling. So while we're in a wonderful situation. The students is settling down, the integration began. We are working very closely with the government of Portugal also to reunite the students with their families. And my latest information is that eventually a decision has been made that the families will be extracted from Afghanistan on a humanitarian basis as a group and be delivered to Portugal to be reunited with their children. So I'm here to further answer your question if there would be any question to be forward, but that's the current status of affairs there. But before I complete my presentation, I just would like to ask Michael to share with you the slideshow that I put together, that in a brief, it covers what's happened with the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, how we evacuated, and eventually what's happening right now with our life. Please share the slideshow and I will be explaining each slide. As soon as the Taliban reached Afghanistan, they immediately, on the first day of their arrival to Kabul, they took over the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. They brought the Afghanistan National Institute of Music under their control as they took over a military barracks. And the Afghanistan National Institute of Music has been turned into a military barrack of the Haqqani group. You see the member of the Haqqani group right now in the campus of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. And Afghanistan National Institute of Music became off the reach of ANIM students. We worked day and night for almost 4 months to evacuate the member of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music out of the country. We were not able to get our students out of Afghanistan before the completion of the evacuation process organized by the international community. We were not able to do this. Though we tried on the 27th of August in 6 buses to take our students to the airport and eventually to get them out of Afghanistan. But the very first evacuation happened on the 3rd of October. And in this next few photos, you will see that the first group of students who had passports, we were able to get out of Afghanistan. The first slide was students in their buses, and now it shows them on the board of Qatar Airways company. So after I got the first group of students out of Afghanistan, over 100 people, still I had to solve the problem of almost 200 more who did not have any travel documents. We tried with the rest of the international community to find a solution, but it looked impossible that we would be able to get passport for them. The only hope that stayed for us, it was the government of Qatar, and therefore I moved to Qatar, to Doha, to meet in person with the officials and to solve the problem there. But of course, it was a wonderful opportunity to reunite with my students. Here you see me, a photo of me, and the first day of my arrival where I meet with the students. But it was also a wonderful opportunity to welcome the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th group of students as we've been organizing, and we solved the problem of passport with the facilitation of the government of Portugal. Here you see a wonderful photo of FARIDA and Zora, the last 2 students who have been evacuated from Afghanistan. This is in Doha airport when they come out of the airplane, and I was waiting to welcome them there. And that was the last 2 for whom I was extremely worried. And when they arrived, I thought that my mission is complete. But then I later managed to discover that no, my mission just begins. Getting them out of Afghanistan is just the beginning. But to make sure that they integrating smoothly into their new life, it is a new mission. Here you see the group of students who are leaving a chartered plane from Doha in Lisbon in Portugal. And the final, all the group arrived to Portugal on the 13th of December 2021. Here you see some photos of students back in action while in Qatar. Here we had a wonderful concert in the Qatar National Museum. Here you see a group of students and junior faculty of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. I mentioned that from the very moment that we got out of Afghanistan, we began performing and making music and introducing Afghan music to the Portuguese community. Here's a concert where we're playing a charity concert for the Science Museum of Portugal. This photo is from the same concert. Yo-Yo Ma was mentioned in Barbados, but Yo-Yo Ma was playing not only a great role behind the scene to help us to evacuate the group, but at the same time, Yo-Yo Ma, when it was time that our students need some extra moral support and also to see some solidarity of a professional musician, he decided to come and to give some master classes and to play music with our students and with the Portuguese musicians as well. So I'm very pleased that we're in a position to bring such a living legend to Portugal to share his expertise and skills, not only with our students, but also with the wider community of musicians. And in February, we'll be hosting another legend of contemporary time. Midori will be traveling to Braga to play with our students. Again, our concert and artistic life begins. In the coming few slides, you will be seeing the small performances of our students in Portugal and also outside of Portugal. Now we're getting slowly our international visibility back. And in the last few months, our students played in a number of European countries, including Germany, France, Netherlands, Belgium. And this series continues in other countries, and we continue to receive invitation from various European countries for our performances. And eventually, after months of our students living in this temporary accommodation in Old Military Hospital, and after the permanent move to Braga, we were able to reconstitute our ensemble and orchestras and to organize the first gala concert of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music in Exiles. In this program, we showcased 8 different musical ensembles, including young soloists, small groups, medium groups, and of course the Afghan Youth Orchestra, which is the largest ensemble of our school. And in this concert, again, it was not just an ordinary concert, but this concert was, in a way, a show of protest against the Taliban. And the concert was live broadcast to Afghanistan, thanks to the Voice of America, and also thanks to the national TV of Portugal. In this concert, we made a very bold announcement to the Taliban that Afghanistan National Institute of Music is alive. It's young boys and kids not only making music, but they are the voice of the Afghanistan in exile, but they are also the guardians and the guardians who will safeguard Afghan music for the future. And they're the young musicians who will be coming to Afghanistan when the time is right, to share new skills and new knowledge that they will be receiving as music students in Portugal. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful. Wow, what important work you're doing. And it really reminds me that of the power of an example. And it seems to me that the Portuguese foreign minister, in welcoming your students to Portugal, he's reinforcing this idea of Portugal as the land of refugees, the land of safety. And this is, of course, a vision of Portugal that comes exactly right from our great hero, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, whose example is very living, very present now in Portugal. He was inducted into the National Pantheon. His story is taught in schools. And I think that maybe without that great example of Sousa Mendes, maybe Portugal might or might not have offered refuge to your students today. And it shows the power and the importance of a great example. In our case, we look to Aristides de Sousa Mendes, but perhaps now we should look to you, Dr. Sarmast, as an example to all of us for how we can make a difference in our own communities today. So I am just going to briefly tell our audience now about some upcoming programs. And while I'm doing so, you can continue adding your questions in the chat box. I see there are quite a few questions already. Our moderator, Cookie Fisher, is collecting your questions and will be asking them to our panelists. So next week, we are focusing on an unknown hero of World War II. His name was James G. MacDonald. He was an American official in the Roosevelt administration who was pressuring the administration to admit Jewish refugees. And of course, we know that the United States did not do what they should have when it came to refugees in World War II. But MacDonald was fighting the good fight. He later became the first UN ambassador to the state of Israel in 1948. And you will see a film about him and learn about a hero that you never knew about before. And I urge you to sign up. That's next week. It's also a free program, as is today's program. The following week, we are speaking about another hero, but we usually think of him as an artist, and that is the mime, the great French mime, Marcel Marceau. His name, Marceau, his last name, was actually his nom de guerre, his name from the resistance in World War II. He was the son of a kosher butcher who was deported to Auschwitz. In other words, the father of the mime was deported. And Marcel, whose original name was Marcel Mangel, then joined the resistance, and he developed his artistry, his skills as a mime, because he was asked to escort children to safety over the mountains into Switzerland. And so his mime, his artistry, was his way of keeping the children quiet as they were escaping to freedom. And in fact, his first public performance was at the liberation of Paris to the US troops. And his first critical write-up was with Stars and Stripes magazine. So it's very interesting to look at his career once you know that that was his beginning. And we have a fabulous film that's just now been released called The Art of Silence. And we're very proud to be presenting it to you. We do hope you'll sign up, and that is in 2 weeks' time. And in 3 weeks' time, we are presenting a brand new book that has just come out from HarperCollins called In the Garden of the Righteous. And it's by the author Richard Horowitz, where he tells numerous stories of heroes, rescuers of World War II. So I'm really looking forward to that event as well. That is a free event. The Marcel Marceau event does require tickets, and the amount of the tickets is whatever's comfortable for you. We do recommend $18 representing life or high, but if you can give more, that's wonderful. And if that's a hardship, then just give whatever you can. We are happy to have you there. So now I will turn the floor back to my friend and colleague, Cookie Fisher, for your questions.
There are many, many questions. The first questions were about the ages of the girls and whether they came with their families. And I'm going to group this question into one. And the other question was they were living with their uncle and not with their parents. Why was that?
Dr. Sarmast, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
Yes. What was the beginning of the question?
The age of FARIDA and Zohra, and if they came with their families, and the issue of them living with their uncle in Kabul and not with their parents.
The age of the girls now is around 14, and they did not come with the full family. We did not have that ability. We had only limited number of spaces offered by the government of Portugal for us. And for us, it was important first to get the students, faculty, music faculty, non-music faculty, and staff with their families, with the understanding that eventually the kids would be able to call and work with the government of Portugal to reunite with their families. The reason that the kids were living with their uncle, normally in Afghanistan, there's a big, families are very big. Quite often families are living together. And in the case of Farida and Zora, it was also the same. They are originally from the province of Ghazni, but they were living in Kabul. Number of family members were living in a big house where they've been sharing rooms and living together. That's the reason they were living together. And the reason that they traveled with their uncle, it was a decision made by the family themselves. And it was also an opportunity to rescue the uncle of the two girls whose life was also in danger because of his activities, Taliban activities in the past years, and his position at the Ministry of Higher Education of Afghanistan.
Another question for you, Dr. Sarmast. Was the United States asked to sponsor the music school, and what was their response?
The United States was a sponsor of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music from 2010 to the last day that the Afghanistan National Institute of Music was closed by the Taliban, in terms of we've been receiving financial support for our activities and program from the United States, as well as from the World Bank and many other countries while we've been operating in Afghanistan. But as soon as the Taliban arrived and they took over the school, they took over the property of the school, and they also took over the finances of the school. Right now that I'm talking to you, the bank account of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music has been frozen, and we do not have access to our financial resources back in Afghanistan.
So now there's a question for both of you, but I will give this to Dr. Sarmast first, about the education that the children are getting in Braga. Aside from music, what are they studying? And also the question of learning Portuguese, which I'm also doing intensively now. And that is a big challenge. So how are the children and the adults doing with their new integration?
The children are fully enrolled as a Portuguese students in conservatory. Some of the students are going through the full educational program of Portugal in the conservatory. Students in grade 10 and over. The students, or we are mainly minor, they're studying in a different school, which is affiliated and associated with the conservatory. It's also part, the kids are studying their general music education, general education in that particular school, which is called Marquis Muniz. And at the same time, the musical education is supported in the same school by the conservatory. This is an affiliated, or as they call it in Portugal, articulated school with conservatory music education program.
And Beth, you mentioned that, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Dr. Sarmast.
In terms of the adults, the adult member of our community, they are fully enrolled in Portuguese classes, and the Portuguese classes are provided by the host institution, who are responsible for the integration of our community. But they are studying a special program for non-Portuguese, which is a technical and vocational, which is Portuguese language provided by the Authority for Technical and Vocational or Special Training.
Thank you. And Beth, you mentioned that you were there the first day the girls were studying Portuguese. What were your impressions?
Well, it was so interesting because, you know, they had really been there a very short period of time. I think probably only a week or so when I had come over, and to see them integrated into the classes, the diligence in which they were listening and paying attention. And then a little bit more down the road, because we were trying to make this film to really, as things were unraveling, we wanted to show their musical education and to see them in their classes, and to get, you know, we saw Zora getting one-on-one trumpet instruction. We saw them singing. We saw them singing in Portuguese and learning their languages. It was quite an immersive program in progress. And I think to give some credit to what Dr. Sarmast was saying, is getting them out of Afghanistan and out of Doha was one thing, but then to get them, to get them assimilated into an educational program, into a living situation. We were really documenting him doing this all in real time. And it was quite remarkable to watch it, because it was happening, very much, in real time. So we got to see it. And now that I haven't been to Braga, but when we were there, we launched the film October 1st. We had a screening of the documentary at the Gulbenkian as right before they had the concert, which is what you're aware of. But yeah, I mean, and to see where they are now, it's moving with lightning speed and really very exciting to see.
It would be nice to have, when you come back, to have a little catch up and see.
Definitely, I would intend to, absolutely.
Another question maybe for Dr. Sarmast is, the group is large and diverse, so age-wise, generational. How do you manage to communicate with each one of them and all of them, and your travel? And when they moved from Kabul to Braga, that must have been a communication nightmare.
When they were still in Afghanistan, and I was working with my team on the ground in Kabul to get them out, well, I've been mainly communicating with my team, with my focal points on the ground. But there was a number of WhatsApp group created between my team and also students, and students also could directly reach out to me via WhatsApp, email addresses, email, or phone calls. That was during that time. But of course, I spent about almost 11 months, 10 months in Portugal since last January, while the integration of our community was underway, and there was a lot of legal issues as well as logistical issues, and where they're going to stay eventually, who will be the guardian of the children, whether the children will be given into foster care or they should live in a residential care. There was a lot of issues, but of course I knew that it's important for me to be in Portugal. I was in Portugal. I had my office in the old military hospital where the students were temporarily staying. And after the students moved to Braga, we managed to establish our offices in Braga, and the students have access directly to my staff and to my team, who are officially employees of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, to provide additional support and care to our students.
And Beth, with all your years of communicating between Washington, D.C. and Afghanistan and Kabul and probably the provinces, how did you manage? What can you tell us about your experience?
I have to say, this was the most challenging documentary I have ever made. It was very difficult to do it because we didn't know who we were filming. We didn't know when we were going to be able to get them. We didn't know exactly how we were going to be able to communicate with them, and on top of that, it was a pandemic. It was a pandemic, and I wasn't able to go to Afghanistan. I was directing the shoots and doing the interviews from my home, at all hours of the night and day, and we didn't know when they'd be leaving, as I think I had mentioned that. So we had to be quite flexible about time and really to trust our people on the ground. And Dr. Sarmast did a great job of keeping me in the loop as much as he could, but a lot of it was just good luck and timing. And there was a point, had we missed FARIDA and Zora, we wouldn't have been able to make the film. I mean, that were our last opportunity. And by the time we made the contact, it wasn't 100% certain when they were going to leave or if we'd be able to catch them. And to improvise, like I said, we had to get, the uncle had to do the filming because we weren't able to. So, documentary filmmaking is a visual medium. So we had to figure out how we could tell the story. And I think we were able to be effective with it. And it was because the girls were so visual, and Dr. Sarmast was able to share so much of what was happening, during the evacuations. We were able to tell the story and get, we got Senator Cassidy to talk about his role. I think Yo-Yo Ma opened up to tell us about, his dealing with the Qataris, how they were able to find a lily pad, if you will, before they went to Portugal, and then to get the Portuguese perspective about why they felt it was important to bring the students there. We kind of filled out the blanks. We didn't really know how the story was going to end or what it was going to be. Eventually, we wanted to end it with a concert, but the timing wasn't such that we could. But we were able to screen the film on their first concert, so it kind of worked really well.
Mm.
But it was a challenge because we didn't really know what the story was going to be. We just documented it and made it work.
So much flexibility, adaptability, problem-solving skills. It takes a lot of work and resilience.
It was a tough
Your
one.
job, the work you did was amazing. The film is wonderful and touching. I remember when we watched it in Lisbon, everybody was crying. So. Another question I wanted to ask, and maybe I'll start with Beth, is about the girls and the issue of focusing on the family that is back home and having to deal with what they're dealing with in Portugal. And how did you see when you spoke to them, how did you see them reacting or their emotional output and thoughts?
Well, I think the girls clearly, miss their families and talk a lot about that. And I think it's very, very difficult for them. I think their relationship with their uncle, who they're very fortunate because I think they're the youngest ones, and Dr. Sarmast would correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I think the uncle who's their guardian has been a real strong ballast for them. And I think their love of education and music has probably helped them to overcome a lot of the fears they had with coming to the country. But one of the things that Dr. Sarmast and the Portuguese government have been working on is to get their families here and to reunite them with their families. And I think there's a lot of hope about that happening sooner than later. And I think also one of the things I was struck by is one night I was with the girls. We went to a music store. At the end of the film, you see them walking around. They all want to go back to Afghanistan, at least FARIDA and Zora. They want to take all the knowledge and everything that they've learned and go back to their country. Their Afghanistan is still very close to their hearts, and they want to take that education and take that know-how and return to a place that's still their home.
There's one.
I just want to add.
Go ahead.
I just want to add here also to give an update that Zora and FARIDA are doing extremely well in their schooling. And Zora got 5 out of 5 in every single subject, including Portuguese. And concerning to the reunion and missing with their families, now we are very hopeful that in 2023, they will be all reunited with their families. This is the latest information that we have got from the Office of the Prime Minister and the Office of Minister for Parliamentarian Affairs, who is leading the immigration program of the Portugal.
That's very good news, and hopefully they can come as soon as possible. One of the questions that I think is very important and that was asked and that I'd like to tag on to another question is the question was, the Taliban preach that they are true Muslims. Does the Muslim religion forbid music, higher education for women? Can you talk a little bit about that dissonance? And also, if you wouldn't mind talking a bit about the situation with women in Afghanistan right now, which is not good.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Sarmast should enter that one first, and I can add some of my thoughts, but let Dr. Sarmast take that.
Definitely, Islam is not banning music. There's no Islamic country where music is banned. That's a new phenomenon that has been promoted by some radicals, new Islamic movements in Afghanistan and outside Afghanistan. And it's mainly by the Salafis, which is based on their narrow interpretation and even misinterpretation of the teaching of Holy Quran. How music can be banned in a society if it's not banned in the Holy Quran, which is the main guide for the Muslims. And therefore, it clearly shows also that how much the Taliban are ignorant about Holy Islam, or how they are trying to represent their own interpretation of Quran as the teaching of Quran, which is totally wrong. when it comes to women's education and women's right also. The very first verses of Holy Quran begins with the word ikra, which means learn. So if Quran is calling on men and women to learn and to study, again, it clearly shows that it's the narrow interpretation, the tribal interpretation of the Taliban, that women should be barred from education. Women's right has nothing to do with Quran. Teaching of women has nothing to do with the Quran. And the same is banning of music in Afghanistan has nothing to do with the Quran. What's happening in Afghanistan is the narrow, ignorant interpretation of Holy Quran and Taliban ideology.
And the Ministry of Virtue and Justice is a new incarnation of the Taliban as well. And when we were making the film and looking at what the interpretation was, what does this ministry do? You know, what is their mission and why is it important? And I'll just briefly say that when I was the chief of the Afghan service and we launched TV Ashna, the women were not wearing hijabs. That was revolutionary in 2006. And then we've seen it just slip back. We saw great progress and now we've seen it slip back. So I think that that's really important to note too, that it's just, it's a sad thing to watch.
So we're getting to the end of the hour and I guess it's time to wrap it up. So Beth, do you have some final thoughts you would like to leave with our audience?
I hope that people will watch the film and look at the resiliency and the hope of the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, and that they're a way forward for women's education, and that there is hope at the end of the tunnel. And I think Dr. Sarmast and the work he's doing in Portugal is certainly an enlightened path.
Dr. Sarmast, what would you like to say in closing?
I'm a hopeful person and I'm very optimistic that the Taliban will be gone very soon, and they are digging their own grave by their action and policies. But while it's happening in Afghanistan, I strongly call on the international community and friends here to make sure that the Taliban are not recognized by the international community, and to make sure that every cent which is sent to Afghanistan under the humanitarian excuses, it's counted for humanitarian purposes and it's not used by the Taliban for ensuring and making the presence of the Taliban in power for long. So please keep your governments accountable about the taxes of the taxpayers, that it should be used for humanitarian purposes, not for the Taliban to being in power.
Thank you, Dr. Sarmast. Cookie, what would you like to say in closing?
Well, my final thoughts when we first met Dr. Sarmast last year when he arrived in Portugal with his students, it really brought back thoughts of my mother finding refuge in Portugal in 1940. Thanks to the act of humanity of Aristides Sousa Mendes, she was able to pass through Portugal and escape. So I want to thank Dr. Sarmast also for your acts of courage and for all the efforts and all the determination that you're putting into helping all these students be able to have further their lives with music.
Let's make the world a better place for everyone together.
Great, amen. So it's been a privilege to present this very important contemporary story of rescue. I hope all of you in the audience will click on those links, will donate to Friends of ANIM and help support the important work that Dr. Sarmast is doing with his team. I would like to thank our illustrious panelists, Beth Mendelson and Dr. Ahmad Sarmast. Thank our moderator coming to us from Portugal, Cookie Fisher. And of course, I want to thank you, our wonderful audience who comes week after week. So please join us next week and in the weeks to come. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Be well. Bye-bye.